Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Aaron Sokol, and you're watching Parsha Inspired. My guest today is Rabbi Pinchas Winston. Rabbi Winston, welcome to the podcast. One thing that's on everybody's mind is the third temple. Now, the third temple is both a spiritual temple and it's a physical temple. So maybe you could talk to the listeners who this temple is for and what its significance is.
The first thing that we have to appreciate, we have to understand, is that the difference in level of reality that we live in today versus what once existed at the time we had the first temple. At least the second temple wasn't the same level as the first temple. We know that the Talmud speaks about 5 things that were missing. It was a beautiful building, right? The Talmud says that anyone who didn't see the building, the temple that Herod finished off, never saw a beautiful building in their entire life. You have to understand what that means. But spiritually speaking, we didn't have the level of miracles. We didn't have the level of connection to God in the second temple that we have in the first temple. The third temple will dwarf the others, the other two. It'll be a whole different level of experience. And what we tend to do, which is it's human, it's natural to do this, to understand something, to appreciate something, we have to compare it to something else we've gone through that we know. It's our only database that we work with. It's very hard to relate to something outside of our own personal experience. So we haven't had anything in our lifetime, the last couple of thousand years, that compares to what the temple reality was, what actually, what the experience was, and what it meant to mankind. And it's hard to describe that because it is outside of our experience. But you have to build the picture, because that's what's going to happen. The third temple comes. It's not just that God is going to build the most beautiful synagogue in the world to date, and we have a lot of beautiful ones to date. And now it's not like the old days where a synagogue was pretty. I mean, in Europe they had some very beautiful synagogues, but today they build beautiful shuls. In Israel, especially recently, they've upgraded a lot. The type of the money has come in. The shuls have been built, beautiful woodwork and lighting and everything. We caught on. We caught on. And so the temple is going to be the nicest one, a bigger one, a more famous one. It's not like that at all. It's a whole different reality. And I think one of the best ways to explain it, and the difference that it meant, to lose it, is described by comparing the first set of tablets that Moses came down the mountain with versus the second set of tablets that we had to settle for because he broke the first set of tablets, and not because he was sloppy, not because he was careless, because he was making a point. And in fact, I go so far as to say that when he broke the first set of tablets, he actually broke spirituality. He broke spirituality. What does that even mean? How can you break spirituality? So the starting point of understanding is how we relate to knowledge. Knowledge affects everything. Everything comes down to perception. The internet became the super information highway. The world has been transformed because the amount of knowledge that's available and the ease of access, and then comes artificial intelligence, which is a very important part of history today, which means it's a very important part of history in the whole thing, the whole spectrum. What does it mean? Because nothing is accidental. It's not just, well, that's what the Gentiles are doing, and we'll take advantage of it too. No, if it's taking the world by storm, we have an expression which we say in Tehillim, Meis Hashem Haisazos, He Nifas Beineni, which means basically that which is wondrous in our eyes is from God. If something catches our attention, the world's focusing on it, it means that is from God. But then you'll ask the question, but everything is from God. So what's the difference? What was King David saying when he made that statement? So the explanation is he was saying that it's overt divine providence, because God works on 2 levels. Most of the time, he works covertly through nature. So he gives the impression that he's not really involved when he's completely involved. But you can't always see it unless you pay attention and focus. Then there's the overt miracles, the things where things happen, where people go, wow, that's amazing. Like that shouldn't have been. How did that happen? So that's God stepping into history and overtly interacting with it, like the 10 plagues in Egypt, the splitting of the sea with the Jewish people, the man falling from the sky, the bread, the heavenly bread, and even the 6-Day War, for example, in modern day terms, where people stood back and said, that was an amazing feat. That doesn't seem to be so natural. I was told that when that happened, I was too young at the time and I was living in Canada at the time, but I was told that people were living here, that even, non-religious Jews were talking about the Messiah coming, because of the miracle of the 6-Day War. That's how dramatic and impactful for people who don't normally connect to God on an everyday basis. To be talking like that shows you the extent of the impact that that war had on the psyche of the Jewish people at that time. And there's been many miracles since then. Me personally, for me, I live in Israel, and I just watching the infrastructure be built up and increased at the rate and the beautiful job they're doing. To me, is like all part of the final redemption picture where God's paving the way for the ingathering of all the exiles, new airports, things like that. But the point is that if it's overt, it catches your attention. So then you have to understand it in the global sense. You just can't say, well, that's just another tool that mankind has come up with. It means something, and it does. It does, because everything, and you have to just stay with me for this journey a bit, because it's a little bit of a journey, but it leads to the answer. It leads to the answer in the end, and what the temple means to us, and what it's going to mean to us, and how it's going to impact our lives even today in advance of getting it. When you think of artificial intelligence, right? You think about the computer, you think about the internet, you think about people going online and asking questions and getting answers, that sound almost, human, if not completely human. And it's easy to get fooled. How many times I keep saying he, right? I guess a woman might say she, whatever, but it's it. It's only an it, but it's so convincing that we actually, ascribe human aspects to it, because it's artificial intelligence, not just a computer answering questions like the old days, but it actually seems like human intelligence even more so. That's not a new thing. That's a very old thing. If I were to ask you, who do you think was the first person to use artificial intelligence, who would you say? Who would you think? Well, people, I don't know. You go online, type it in, 1956. They started working on it. They gave it the name AI in 1956 when they started to, they didn't even have it yet, but they were working on it theoretically. And eventually they developed it, and now we have it in the world. And it's like literally science fiction coming true before our very eyes. But they're not the first one to use artificial intelligence. Who was the first one to use artificial intelligence? Chava, Eve. She was the one, right? She didn't have a computer, right? So what does it mean? So it comes down to how you define intelligence and what's artificial intelligence, what the Torah calls intelligence. Well, to answer that question, all you need to do is open a Siddur and go to the Shemona Esrei. And the very first blessing after we say, Kedusha, is the blessing for intelligence, for knowledge. You give man knowledge. And we mention, depends upon which text you have, because the Sephardim have a little bit different text, but it's the same idea, exact same idea. We, the Ashkenazim, will say Dea B'Diva Haskel, which literally means knowledge, understanding. And the last word's a little bit more tricky. Some say discernment, some say, integration, but it's a little bit different. The first one is simply factual information, then being is understanding, right? But this third category, that's the tricky one. But we mentioned three. So in the other textual, formats, you have Chachma Bina V'das, which means wisdom and knowledge and this thing called das, but it's the exact same idea, just different wording. And there's a reason for that. And actually, the truth is, Chachma Bina V'das is actually more accurate than the other way around, than the Ashkenazi version. But the same idea. Why are there three? Are we simply repeating ourselves? Are we simply thanking God for intelligence and being more specific? So we're mentioning three different levels or categories of it? No. The rabbis were trying to, inculcate into our way of thinking that there's this thing called wisdom and there's this thing called knowledge. In fact, there were two trees in the Garden of Eden, and one was the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the other one was Eitz Chaim. There actually were other trees too, but those are the two main stars, right? Those are the two main trees. There are other trees, but those are the ones that counted the most. And if you go back to the beginning, right, you see actually what happens, what transpires, and it's a longer story. The Kabbalah goes into a lot more detail about the actual first sin of man and woman back at the beginning than you'll find in the Chumash itself. But the main point is that the central piece of the entire story is after the snake causes confusion. It's the first time that Eve has ever experienced this confusion. She'd never had a question in her entire life, which is very short, at this point in time, but everything was black and white. It was true and false. It was literally as absolute as it can possibly be. We've never seen that since, that level of experience, of knowledge. And the snake comes along and he creates a question. He gets into a dialogue with her and he forces her to have to deal with a situation that she never dealt with before. And now she's confused. So what does the verse say? She looks at the tree. She's looking for answers. She's looking for answers. So she needs to resolve. It's bugging her. She needs to resolve the issue. Where's Adam? We don't know where Adam is right now. The Medrash says he actually was on a little, teal, what do you call it? Like a little trip with God, exploring the garden. He wasn't there when she needed him. And as a result of that, the snake became her teacher, so to speak, at that moment. And he points in the direction of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, says, that's where your answer is. And she says, at least she thinks to herself, according to what the verse says, that she looked at the tree, was good for food, fine. That much we know, right? But it was nechmad le'anayim lahaskil. It appeared to the eyes as a good thing for understanding. She's not interested in the food. She's not interested in the physical taste of it. She wants to understand. That's the word haskel, right? Haskil, haskel. It's the same idea. Seichel comes from the same word, right? So she's looking for seichel. She's looking to have haskel, which is a good thing. That's what we're supposed to do. So what's the problem? What was her sin? So the Zohar explains, because the tree was never meant to be forbidden forever. God didn't make a tree that should exist as a forbidden tree forever. She was meant to eat. They were meant to eat from it, actually, when Shabbat came in. That was, there was a time period that they had to go through to develop themselves to get to the point where they could handle the knowledge. So what was she supposed to do instead? So the Zohar says she should have eaten from the tree of life at the same time. Make a sandwich, like Hillel in the time of the Beis Mikdash, we do with the Seder, Korach, make a sandwich. She'd have been fruit from the tree of life, and the tree of knowledge would eat them together, and then not only would the knowledge not have damaged her, it would have brought her closer to God. The snake knew that, and that's why he pushed her away from it and into the tree of knowledge of good and evil instead, so she would eat from it. So what was she doing in the end? She was taking a shortcut. She wasn't going from there to Bina to Haskell like you're supposed to, because there are no shortcuts to wisdom. There are no shortcuts to wisdom. In order to become you could become a knowledgeable person easily today. I mean, you just sit in front of the computer for hours a day, going from website to website to website. You become a doctor, you become a computer specialist, you can become whatever you want, not certified necessarily, but you can end up knowing a tremendous amount of knowledge. Does it make you a better person in the end? Does it make you closer to God in the end? No, not necessarily, and unlikely. On the contrary, it results in a lot of scams in the end. But wisdom, there are no shortcuts. So from the Torah's perspective, artificial intelligence means that anytime a person tries to shortcut the system, they try to get wisdom without going through the process of Deya Bina the Haskell. You literally work on yourself. You investigate. You get an understanding of the material. But not just that, you become one with it, because that's the bottom line. The bottom line is knowledge is there's technical information. Okay, you have to fix your computer. You just need to know what to do. But in terms of being a human being, in terms of achieving personal fulfillment, you have to be able to get to a point in life where the knowledge is not just up here, but down here as well. In fact, the rabbis point out that one of the basic differences, there are many differences between Bilam, the sorcerer mentioned in the Torah, and Moses himself, obviously, right? But one of the main differences was that everything that Moses learned went from his head down to his heart. Stopped here on Bilam. And that's why you find he's inconsistent. He talks about God like he knows him. He says, I know God, the Das Elyon, I know the upper levels of knowledge, understanding. And he says, I can't say anything that God will not let me speak. He literally sounds like a big Talmid Chacham. And then he goes ahead and does exactly the opposites. How does that happen? How can you know that and yet still do? Well, we're all doing the same thing. We're all, being inconsistent. And it's not always hypocrisy. A lot of times it's because people don't feel in their bones in their life. We have ideas that are so part and parcel of who we are that if you violate the idea, it feels like violation of the self. We can't do it. I once read a story. I must have read it about 40 years ago, at least, maybe even longer. And to this very day, I was amazed, and I'm still amazed by the story. Somebody had killed somebody, okay, accidentally. And he's afraid that he would be incriminated and have to, I mean, even accidentally, sometimes a person has to go to jail for things like that. And so he got away. He escaped. And the police didn't find him. They didn't know he did it. They didn't find him. He turned himself in. He turned himself in. They didn't even know who it was, but he turned himself in anyhow. You know why? Because he said that I couldn't live with myself. The pain of living, free, but knowing that I did something wrong and not paying for it was overwhelming, and he'd rather go to jail because it was so part of him not to kill somebody in the end. And I think most people are the same way. The Gemara brings cases of people who are told, if you don't kill this person, we're going to kill you. You have to die instead. And a lot of people will. They will die instead of killing somebody else. So that's what we call Haskell. That's the level of Haskell. That's what you become one with the knowledge. That's what's supposed to be going on inside the yeshivas. When people learn Torah, that's what's supposed to happen. Unfortunately, we're not taught this. People don't realize it. And they think that it's enough just to know the material backwards and forwards. And then we wonder why there's so many inconsistencies between what people know and how they behave. And the answer is because they have Dea and they have Bina, but they don't always have Haskell, because that's where all the work comes in. That's where you have to become really one with the knowledge, and that there's no shortcuts for that. So the Torah says that anytime somebody tries to get to that level without actually going through the steps, you can call it artificial intelligence. It's not the real thing. Seichel is intelligence.
There's always a pattern in Judaism that we're given something for free, we're shown what it could be like, and then we're taken it away and then say, okay, now try to get to it. This happens countless times. It happens. It's just a pattern that happens even through the Nevi'im. So maybe the obvious example was the Garden of Eden. And then the next example was the giving of the Torah, where we were given the Torah, and then Moshe actually walked down the mountain and made sure they saw it and then broke it, because he wanted them to see it. And then he said, okay, now work back to get it. And that's beautiful.
In fact, if you look at not 2 parshas ago, Parshas Akiv, that was a parsha before this last Shabbos, and the Balaturi, one of the commentators on the Chumash, the very beginning, he says the gematria of the word Akiv is 172. Right? What does that mean? He says 172 was the amount of letters that were the difference between the first set of tablets and the second set of tablets that Moshe came down with, to tell us that even though that Moshe broke the first set of tablets, you can still access them through the second set of tablets, but you have to work on it. So what was the difference? What was the fundamental difference? So the Leshem, a big Kabbalist, since he died in 1926, but one of the most famous Kabbalists in the last couple of years, he explains, I guess based upon the Vilna Gaon and the Rizal, he explains that when a person, if Moshe had come down with the first set of tablets, and we'd received them, he didn't break them, then you would have learned something, and it automatically would have become Haskell. In other words, right now we have to do Deya B'Neva Haskell, right? We have a Musar movement, right, to try to help us integrate Torah concepts because we don't do it on our own. We have books that come on talk about Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just, because to make up for the difference. But on the first set of tablets that Moshe came down with, if you learn something, you automatically change your life because of it. You just didn't have a choice. That was the reality of it. It was what we call Torah's Mashiach, was Messianic Torah. It was the Torah that we're going to see in the future once Mashiach comes and we enter that period of history. But the second set of tablets, and the reason why there's a difference, because the first set of tablets God himself carved out on the mountain and then wrote on them. The second set of tablets we see in the Chumash itself, the Torah, that Moshe carved them out, even though God wrote on them. But the fact that Moshe carved them out already tells you it was a lesser level of Torah. So the Leshem explains that meant that you could learn it and it wouldn't necessarily change you. You can read the Chumash from front to back and the whole story, and it won't automatically change you. That's the work that you have to put in to get to it. You can do it, but you have to do the work. And people assume it's going to happen naturally. And the reason why this is so important, because the first set of tablets actually correspond to the first temple. And the second set of tablets Kabbalistically correspond to the second temple. And you don't need the third set of tablets because the third temple is forever. It's going to last forever, God believe. And what was the difference? So it's telling you. See, the Gemara, the Talmud says in Maseches Brochos, it says that anybody who has deya, it's as if the temple was built in their generation. Very obscure statement. The Gemara likes to do things like this. It likes to say like literally incredibly impossible things and then let you work it out to understand what they mean by that. But that literally, it brings a verse to make its point. It shows how there are two names of God, and the word "de" or actually "deos" in the pasuk is between the two of them, and it makes this connection because all those the word temple is also between the two words. We don't need to go into details of this, but the statement itself is remarkable for two reasons. One, how is it possible that somebody, even if they're a genius and they know all of Torah, how is it possible that's commensurate to building a basic maintenance, going up on the Temple Mount, rebuilding the temple, reinstituting all the things that were, how do you compare that? How is it possible? And second of all, why does he use the word deus and not das or seichel like we just said? It seemed to be focusing only on the knowledge aspect of it. Because the rabbis were telling you, Chazal were telling us this statement that was the beauty of the first temple. You didn't have to go through the 3 steps again. It was like going back to Adam before the sin, before the snake entered, before Chava did the whole thing. It was going back to the ideal state of existence when you learned something, you only had to be aware of it and it automatically changed you as a person. That was the first temple. The first temple was this reality of God that, you were enveloped by the reality of God and the consciousness that you lived. It raises the question, of course. So if that was the case, and the Jewish people were on such a high level at that time, how was it destroyed? How could they lose it? How could there be so much evil in the world? That's a different discussion. We could have it another time, God willing, in the future, gets into the whole idea of cause and effect in Jewish history and God's master plan and things like that. But that's not the point right now. The main point right now is that when a person went up to the temple and experienced the temple firsthand, they literally, it was like, as an example, a small example, right? When they decided to send people into space, they had to deal with certain things that were not taking place on Earth. For example, weightlessness, a lack of friction. In outer space, you knock something down here on the table or in the air, you blow a balloon, right? It fights against, other forces, air currents, things like that. It doesn't go on forever. But in outer space, if you nudge something, it can go on forever in that direction without any fuel, nothing. Weightlessness. We don't have it in this world. Even if a person's floating in the air, they're still dealing with gravity at the same time. And you're also dealing with gravity in outer space apparently too. But this, so they devise all kinds of experiments or all kinds of things to give astronauts, potential astronauts or future astronauts, an opportunity to experience it a little bit. To take them up in airplanes and jets, and they drop down, incredible, straight dropping down. So for a little while, they're floating in the air. It's all calculated at certain speeds, but it's not the same thing. No matter how much you try to prepare yourself for outer space down on Earth, until you get there, it's not the same thing. It's all, and you hear the astronauts talk about it the first time when they went and they actually experienced it. It doesn't make a difference when they went down, what happened down here on Earth. It's a whole different experience. That's what we have to understand about what it means to get back to temple. We just came off of the 3 weeks, right? The 3 weeks instituted by the rabbis after the destruction of the first temple, really, right? And then later on, it continued after the second temple too. My understanding is that for a little while they stopped keeping Tisha B'Av while they were building the second temple. But then once that was destroyed or stopped, they went back to doing it all over again. But the whole point of the 3 weeks is that we're supposed to focus on what it means to have the temple, so that we'll mourn for it once again. And only then does God see that we're ready for it. And that's very important. Why? It's actually brought down in some of the Kabbalistic works that, when God, but let's, at Mount Sinai, we see this. At Mount Sinai, the Jewish people died twice. When God said the first 10 of the 10 commandments, they dropped dead. Why? What was deadly about hearing God speak? It was a completely outside the box experience. There was nothing in their lives until that point, even the plagues, right? It was not the same thing. Even the man falling from the sky was not the same thing as hearing God actually speak at Mount Sinai. It was sensory overload. The body couldn't handle it. It might have been ecstasy. In fact, the nicest way to die, according to the Talmud, is called nashika, which means kiss. It's a divine kiss. What's a divine kiss? It's an exposure of God that's so overwhelming for the body and the soul. The soul gets sucked out of the body like a vacuum cleaner, pulling out dust with the carpet, and the body can't hold the soul anymore, and it dies, but with the greatest pleasure. It's saved for righteous people. Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rachel, Leah, they all died by Nashika, because that's saved for the righteous people. It's the ultimate way to go to leave this world. And again, it's just being exposed to God. So then they were resurrected. God brought them back to life again, and he spoke the second of the 10 commandments, and they dropped it again. Even the first experience was not enough to prepare them for the second time, and they dropped it again. And then God revived them. And then they said to Moshe, you know what? This living, dying thing, a little bit much for us. How about you get the rest of it from God, and you give it over to us? The Medrash does say that they could hear God speak, but it wasn't so directly anymore, and therefore they didn't die. Moshe got the rest of the Torah. But what we take out of all of this is you have to really sit down and think and contemplate, what this means in terms of everyday life. First of all, in terms of what's coming up, because we talk about the war of Gog and Magog, right? We talk about Armageddon. We talk about end of day scenarios. What's the point of all that stuff? Why must we go through all of that? What are we cleaning up? Or, what are we supposed to, get out of it in the end? So we're being brought up to speed, whether we realize it or not, and specifically the Jewish people, right? But we're being brought up to speed, meaning that the transformation from this stage of history to the Messianic stage of history is like going to outer space, and even more so. And even more so. It's going to be such a transformation of the fabric of reality that people will drop dead from the shock
So
if you're not ready.
the tree of life is actually right now really alive. So the
Yes,
Industrial Revolution is really God instilling a new consciousness of redemption. And that's why these videos are everybody's watching our videos, is because we're talking about something that everybody in their self, in their real shirish of themselves, they feel this happening.
I
And
think
it's
so
kind of
too.
like Tamu Ru'u, you have to taste it. When
Yeah.
you come
Oh,
to Eretz Yisrael, you
that's
taste it.
exactly the point. Because I can have an amazing spiritual experience. I can work on myself on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. I can put everything I have into it, and build myself up to have an amazing spiritual God experience. But I can't tell it to you. I mean, I can tell it to you in words, but you're not going to know it for yourself unless you experience it on your own. So that's what God's doing. That's what AI represents. It's a trend, even though, it's conspiracy, dangers, all these things like that. I mean, clearly the lesson remains the same, that without wisdom, the tree of knowledge of good and evil remains dangerous. Remains dangerous. The net result of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil was mankind hiding from God. They jump into the bushes, right? Symbolically showing the separation. That's why death comes into the world. Death is not a punishment. Death is a consequence. If you unplug, your radio from the wall, it dies. If you distance yourself from God, who's the source of life, you're unplugging yourself from life. You die as a result of it. Maybe not right away, but over time you become mortal. But We're now working our way back after almost 6,000 years. We're in the period of rectification, clearly, because it corresponds to the 6 days of creation and the whole cheshbon which we did before, right? But we're working our way back, and God's trying to bring us in line for what He's about to do next. Everything that happens from this point onward, actually earlier, but certainly from this point onward, is part of that preparatory process. So if AI is taking the world by storm, and the world is like just being pulled into it, and people are head over heels and literally stumbling in it, then you have to stand back and say, well, how do I use it to come closer to God? How do I use this to enhance my spiritual experience? How do I use this to extend my ability to be able to connect up on a higher level, in terms of understanding consciousness and living as a greater person? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves, because this is what God's doing. He's trying to help us move up that ladder that we ought to climb, but we don't climb on our own. But in His kindness and His mercy, He makes it that inspires us, and He gives us the mechanism and the tools to be able to do this. And that's why I wrote this book. This book is called House of God. Right. The premise of the book, when you hear the words House of God, what do you think? Right? House of God usually means, well, it's a Beit Knesset, a shul, a synagogue. It's a house of God. Why it's a house of God? Because that's where you pray, and you pray to God there. So they were called House of God. But the book then goes on to show how House of God is literal. The temple wasn't just a synagogue that God happened to visit, and He was the chief rabbi of the synagogue there. That wasn't what it was. He imbued it with Himself. The stones themselves, actually, the house of God was literally a house of God. And that's why the Talmud says that when Nebuzaradan, who was sent by Nebuchadnezzar in the first temple to destroy the temple, and he destroyed the first temple, which the world was shocked because they thought it couldn't happen. Even those days, people believed in God. Even the bad guys believed in God, the Jewish God. And they were shocked. Nebuzaradan was was patting himself on the back for doing it. And God, in a bus call, a heavenly voice comes out and says, no big deal. You're grinding already ground flour, and you're killing an already killed people. What does that mean? It means that you could never get to the temple as long as it was imbued with my holiness, as long as I was in the stones itself, in the entire structure and all that was going on there, you can get close to it. No way, no how. What happened was the Jewish people, by taking it for granted, by not using it properly, compelled me to leave those stones and leave it as a stone building now. Now it's just another building. It has holiness. We have a concept of things that were once used for holiness remain holy, but not the same level. Now it can be destroyed. That's what he's saying. So the house of God is not just a building, but literally is a house made from God, so to speak, because He imbued His holiness in their life. But the conclusion of the book is the real house of God, you and me. Where do we see this? Because it says in Parshas Truma, right, in the Chumash, very famous, right? Everyone is aware of this idea, I think, who learns Chumash, right? Where God says, I want you to build me a tabernacle, a mishkan, so I can dwell besochem, right, amongst you. And the rabbis, the literal reading of the verse is that God's simply saying, I can be amongst you, the nation. Let's build the tabernacle. I'll be there. You go there, and we'll all be one big happy family. That's what amongst them means. But the rabbis go ahead and they say, no, it's literal. It means amongst them, within you. If you ever see the picture of the third temple, what it's supposed to look like? Yechezkel's prophecy, it looks like a human being. Literally looks like human beings with arms and legs, and the altar is in the place of the heart, right? And the Holy of Holies is in the place of the brain, right? It literally looks like human being because it is human being. We were always meant, there's always meant to be a temple, that's for sure. The Mishkan, it's a debate, but the temple for sure. But more than that, we're always supposed to be the temple, which is one of the reasons why in last week's parsha we just read, it doesn't mention where the temple is going to be. God makes several references to the place that I will allow my name to dwell. And there's different, you brought down some of these things, and there are different commentaries who talk about this. Why doesn't God identify it? We know it's the place of the Akedah, where Abraham brought up Yitzchak. We know it was known. It was known this is going to be the place of the temple. Yaakov knew it was a tradition. So why does God act mysteriously about the whole thing? He does the same thing about the land with Abraham, right? To the land which I will show you. Abraham had already been there. He knew which land God was going to give to him. So what's the secrecy? What's the mystery in the end? And not only that, but you can ask another question. Why, when God talks about bringing us to the land, does he refer to the land as Eretz Canaan and not Eretz Israel? Canaan is what the land was called by the Canaanites. And they were decrepit people. They were, completely immoral people. So why borrow their name? Why? The Torah is eternal. So you're writing in the Torah, eternal Torah, a name that's only transitionary. Why put it there? Because the Torah is telling you a tremendously important foundation point that applies today as well. And that is, Eretz Israel is not a geographical location. It happens to have a location. It's what you make it by living up to a standard of life. In other words, God was telling the Jewish people, when you get there, it's going to be Eretz Canaan. You know why? Because all the sparks are in the realm of impurity. The people living there did nothing to sanctify the land. You want it to be Eretz Israel? You have to make Eretz Israel. By going into the land, elevating the sparks out of the impurities, right? By living by Torah on the land, you transform it into Eretz Israel. The same thing is true of the Makam Mikdash, the place of the base of Mikdash. It's technically the place where it has to be, because that's the place that lines up with heaven and the whole thing like that. But I cannot call it the place of the temple until you get to the level where you're fitting for a temple. Then that will make it the place finally. It will line up finally. And the same is true of all of us. God is telling us, ultimately speaking, the temple is the temple. There's no replacement for it. But you are also temple. The place that I will place my name could be you too. Can me as well. If you elevate yourself to the point where you can be a temple for God, then that's also a place, a Makam Mikdash, so to speak. And that's the conclusion of the book. That we go from just a building, a glorified synagogue, to an actual building built from the reality of Hashem and God, right? To ourselves, to become the house of God, in our own individual way on an everyday basis, living our lives. But that takes a transformation, something we call das. You have to go from Dea to Bina to Haskell and transform your perception of reality. Once you've done that, then you're living, your feet will walk on the ground. They have to. You still have to pay the bills, right? You still have to take care of a family. You have responsibilities. You're not going to disappear into the air to some other place. That's what death does. But in the meantime, but your head in the clouds. And that's how Abraham lived. That's how Yitzchak lived. That's how Yaakov lived. That's how David HaMelech lived. And all these great people, they walk the face of the earth because we need to. But their minds and their heads, another dimension altogether.
This is actually so beautiful, the tapestry, the way you combined so many ideas. But when I think of all that you spoke about, not just knowledge of God, but like absolute certainty of God, so much so I remember my Rebbe, Rev. Usher Zelig Rubinstein of blessed memory, when I would walk with him, he didn't believe in God. He knew God was there. He knew everything was going to be good. If something, like, there was never a question. And regarding Eretz Yisrael, the klipa, the shell always comes before the fruit inside.
Right.
And I saw an interesting idea by the Ramdur, Moshe David Valley. He writes that a Jew is a dead Jew, a Jew after they pass on, that body has the most amount of impurity of anything in the world because its potential is so high. And he explains this to mean that Eretz Yisrael also, because its potential is so high, all these nations, they stuck to it. And like Rashi says, it was va'osei makom, it was mukukul miyakol, it was literally, we need to get into the dirt. We have to kiss the dirt. The Baya have a menake, keep it up. He would clean the streets, and we would, like the Navi says, that they would bow down to Hashem, and they would literally, kiratzu avodecha es avaneha, these stones, like you said, we read in Isaiah 54 this week, verse 12, discusses the different types of stones, the stones that this land is made of, that Hashem instills in this land. And the third idea I wanted to just respond to was that you mentioned Hashem bringing his Shechina, his glory into the stones themselves. But you know, at the same time, at the same token, Ezekiel describes these stones and describes their width and their dimensions. That perhaps us building it and then making it as a vessel for God to then put his knowledge, as you say, his consciousness, in the world consciousness of
Absolutely.
knowledge of God.
Let me back up that idea with an interesting idea, an important thought. The Gemara, the Talmud speaks about Herod and why he built the second temple. Why did he go to build? He actually made this fantastic, beautiful edifice for the Jewish people. Why? So the Talmud says that he actually was paranoid because he's a very he didn't have a good origin to be king of the Jewish people. He usurped the power from the Hashmonaim and made himself king. So he was worried that they would try to overthrow him. So the Talmud says that he killed off all the major rabbis of his generation, literally murdered them all, and left behind only a couple. One of which was Baba Buta, who happened to be blind. He was blinded by him, and he was blind, right? So Herod, still being paranoid, wanted to find out whether Baba Buta was conspiring against him. So he pretended to be somebody else. And he asked him all kinds of questions, and everything he asked him, Baba Mbuta probably suspecting the whole thing, but he was a chacham, he was a wise person, so he answered correctly the entire time. He was so good at it that Herod was impressed. And he said, if I knew that he didn't say that I know you like me. He just said, if I knew that the rabbis were so careful about what they say and how they say it, I wouldn't have killed them all off like that. A little bit late, but that's what he said. How can I make amends? How can I make amends? So Baba Buddha says, listen, you extinguished the light of the world by killing off all these rabbis. Put some of that light back in by building the temple. And he agrees. And he goes ahead and does it. But it's subtle, but the point is very important. The Gemara says that anyone who didn't see the temple, they never saw a beautiful building in their lifetime. What? We're talking about stones. There's been no more beautiful buildings in history than the second temple. They built, and the Romans built incredible, structures and buildings, and certainly since then, look at the buildings today we have. They knew that there's going to be technology and all that. So what would the rabbis say? No, but this building wasn't just built from marble, fancy colors of marble matching the sky. It was built in place of the rabbis who died for the sake of God and Torah. That's what this building is. It's the light that the second temple was coming to bring back was the light that these rabbis gave off. Now that they're dead, this is to replace it, not the same level, but in a sense, it's the extension of their light. That's what they mean. That's why this building is so beautiful, because the Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice that they represented, that went into why they died, and eventually their deaths led to the building of the second temple, a house of God. In the end, God says that's what makes it the most beautiful building in the world. So you're 100% right? We have to have, like you said, be dorish. We have to want it with everything. We have to want that higher level of reality. We have to stop being satisfied with everyday life. It's not who we are.
I'm reminded of a story I heard from Rabbi Biederman. He says that somebody came to a great rabbi and said, my friend I was walking with my friend, and a car came and hit my friend. He got thrown in the air, and I thought he died. And he stood up and he walked away. And then I'm so shocked that he, didn't become like immediately realize that there's God and everything. So he looked at him and said, what about you? He says, well, it happened to my friend. It didn't happen to me. Sometimes we could witness things. We could witness redemption stare us in the face, and we still say, God, is this really happening? Is this really this whole change? The whole world has.
That's the most amazing thing. That brings us back to the beginning of the discussion.
Yes.
It's not that we need to know more. It's that we need to know what we know already better. That's the difference. How many times, and this is what meditation does, this is what contemplation does, this is what we're doing. It's like you're taking, I once asked somebody when I was still single, and I was for Shabbos at a friend of mine, it's one of my actually Rebbes, my teachers. And I said to him, what's the difference between your learning now that you're married versus the learning you did before you were married, you know? And he said to me, he said, when you're before you're married, your learning is vertical, right? You're adding, you're adding, you're adding, you're adding, you're adding, always getting more and more and more. That's what it's all about, he said. And you think that's enough. You think that's all you need to do. He said, when you get married, your learning becomes horizontal, meaning that all of a sudden, all these things and these concepts and these ideas that you thought you understood because you heard them spoken and you gave them some thought, you thought you understood them. Reality has this incredible way of educating us about what we don't know because we fall short and we find out that we didn't have that strength that we thought we had, or that calmness that we thought we had, or that seichel that we need to be able to, to run a family and household and to survive at the same time and keep learning Torah. Becomes horizontal. And that's what Deah B'Hatz was all about. That's what the basic mikdash was about. The basic mikdash, if I could sum up in one line, it made reality real. We think we know what that means. I mean, I'm looking at you right now, and my brain's telling me I'm sitting in front of a three-dimensional person in front of me, right in front of me. On your end of the camera, you are three-dimensional. But what I'm looking at is a two-dimensional replication of a bunch of data information that was fed from your computer to my computer, and the shadow convinces my brain I'm looking at something that's three-dimensional is really two-dimensional. And even physicists today, they've come up with the idea of simulations theory, that reality is not what we think it is. The brain does incredible stuff and it rebuilds things, and we're convinced that it's the real thing, but it's not. But at the very least, you have to realize that, unlike what the Greeks taught us, seeing can lead to believing, but often doesn't. If anything, believing leads to seeing. In fact, we go back to the original concept about, I said at the beginning, Me'ez Hashem Haisa Zos, He Nifas Be'einenu, right? This is from God. This is that which is wonders from our eyes. You can actually flip the statement around and read it the following way. If you don't see God in everyday life, what's going on around you and the miracles happening to you, it's because you stop making life wondrous. As the Rambam says, take the time to like health. We rattle off a blessing after coming out of the bathroom, because if you're healthy most days of the year, it becomes unimportant to you. But all of a sudden you get sick and that blessing changes completely. Rather than wait for crisis and reality to impose upon us the need to better understand things, use your brain. Use your brain. That's what it's given for. And that's not that once upon a time it was just a thing you had to do to become better. Now, as we're reaching the end of history, and we are for so many different reasons, this is the time that God's saying, who's a thinker? Who's a thinker? Who appreciates? Who's prepared to do the work to go from Deah to Bina V'Has? I'll give you hints. I'll give you help. I'll give you tools. I'll give you means. I'll give you mechanisms. I'll give you all these things, right? But you have to do the work. There's no shortcuts. There's no room for artificial intelligence. And if anything, AI is showing us how powerful intelligence can be when you remove certain barriers, right? And you allow yourself, to be free of ego and biases and things like that. It's what you can come up with and understand, and the insights. I've used it for editing lately, and the part of the fun of it has been how it takes something that I write intuitively, and then sends back to me what I've accomplished with it, what I said, how this works, and I didn't have that in mind.
One thing Rabbi Tuvia Singer said about AI is that AI never gets insulted. If you tell it you're absolutely wrong, it says, I'm sorry. And that's the end of the conversation. It doesn't hold a grudge. So it does have, we could also, I guess, learn from that as well. So the name of the book is House of God. Yes. Is it available? We could leave a link in the description. People want to order it.
It's actually available in Amazon in all three forms: paperback, hardcover, and Kindle version. Through my website, which is www.36.org. It's available in PDF format. And anybody has a problem, they can always contact me directly for more information. But yes, it is available. Baruch Hashem.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Pinchas Winston.